$40,000. That is what a 5-cent coin is worth, and we are starting right now with the single most valuable date in the entire Australian 5-cent series. This coin is selling between $10,000 and $40,000 in today's market, and the Australians who are finding these are not professional collectors or coin dealers. They are ordinary people who simply knew what to look for. This is that information. Let us get straight into it. The 1966 Australian 5-cent coin. The 1966 Australian 5-cent coin holds a place in history that very few coins in this country can claim. This was the very first year that Australia introduced decimal currency, replacing the old pounds, shillings, and pence system that had been in use for generations. The date alone makes this coin significant, but what truly separates the valuable examples from the ordinary ones is condition, mint errors, and variety. And when all three align, you are looking at a coin that commands anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 in today's market. The obverse of this coin carries the effigy of Queen Elizabeth II as designed by Arnold Makin, and the reverse features the echidna, one of Australia's most iconic native animals designed by Stuart Devlin. Stuart Devlin's animal reverse designs became legendary in Australian numismatic history, and this 1966 issue was the very first time Australians saw those designs in circulation. That historical weight adds enormous collector value on top of everything else. Now, the coins that reach the upper end of that $10,000 to $40,000 range are almost exclusively those graded MS65 or above by professional grading services like PCGs or NGC. An MS65 specimen means the coin is gem uncirculated, sharp strike, full luster, no post-mint handling marks of any significance, and eye appeal that stops experienced collectors in their tracks. When you hold one of these under a loupe, the fine detail on the echidna's spines is crisp, the fields are mirror-like, and there is absolutely no softness in the strike whatsoever. The errors on 1966 5-cent coins are where things get truly exciting for Australian collectors. One of the most sought-after varieties is the double-die obverse, where the Queen's portrait shows a clear doubling effect most visible in the lettering around the coin's edge, specifically in Elizabeth and Australia. This doubling is not a trick of the light, it is a genuine mint error caused by the hub being pressed into the die more than once at a slightly different angle. When you find this variety in high grade, the value conversation starts well above the base range. There is also the misaligned die error variety, where one face of the coin, either obverse or reverse, is rotated out of alignment with the other. Australian coins are struck with both dies in what is called metal alignment or coin alignment, and any significant deviation from this is a mint error. A rotation error of 45 degrees or more on a 1966 5-cent is an exceptional find. Anything approaching 180 degrees, which collectors call a rotated die error or inverted, is extraordinarily rare and will comfortably push values toward or beyond the top of that $40,000 ceiling. The planche errors on this year are also worth understanding. Because 1966 was the first year of decimal coinage production in Australia, the Royal Australian Mint was ramping up production at enormous scale under significant time pressure. Quality control, while generally good, was not perfect, and as a result, off-center strikes, clipped planche errors, and broadstrike errors from this year do exist in collector hands. A clipped planche, where a portion of the coin's edge is missing due to the blank being punched out incorrectly, in MS condition from 1966, is the kind of piece that auction houses love to feature because bidding can become fierce. The silver content question also comes up with this coin, and it is worth addressing clearly. The 1966 5-cent was struck in cupro nickel, not silver, with a composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. There are no officially released silver strikes of the circulation 1966 5-cent for general collectors, though proof versions struck for sets carry their own premium. A 1966 proof 5-cent in perfect condition within its original set packaging is a desirable piece, but the truly individual high-value examples are the circulation coins in exceptional grade or with verifiable mint errors. Population reports from PCGs and NGC show that coins graded MS66 and above from 1966 are genuinely scarce. The combination of a first-year issue, an iconic reverse design, and over 50 years of attrition means that finding an original roll or a single gem example today is not a common occurrence. Estate sales and old collections coming to market are where these gems tend to surface. And when they do, experienced Australian dealers and international registry set collectors compete aggressively. For anyone in Australia sitting on a 1966 5-cent coin that looks too good to have been in circulation, unusually bright, no wear on the echidna's spines, original mint luster still present, the first step is professional attribution and grading. Do not clean it, do not polish it, and do not store it loose with other coins. The value is in the originality of the surfaces, and anything that disturbs that originality reduces the realized price at auction dramatically. The 1966 5-cent is not just a coin. It is the starting point of Australia's decimal currency story, and the market reflects that deeply. Stay tuned, because the next coin on our list carries its own extraordinary story, and the values are going to surprise you. Next up, the 1977 Australian 5-cent coin. The 1977 Australian 5-cent coin sits in a price range of $3,500 to $10,000. And understanding exactly why this particular year commands that kind of money is the key to knowing whether the coin sitting in your collection is worth a second look or a trip to a professional grader. Most people walk past 1977 5-cent coins without a second thought. The collectors who understand this date know better. The 1977 issue is considered a low mintage year in the context of Australian 5-cent coinage. While exact mintage figures for every year of Australian decimal coinage are not always publicly distributed in complete detail, the evidence from population reports at PCGs and NGC confirms what experienced dealers have known for decades. High-grade examples from 1977 are substantially harder to find than comparable examples from surrounding years. Scarcity at the top of the grade scale is the engine that drives this coin's premium pricing. The obverse continues with the Mautian effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, and the reverse retains Stuart Devlin's echidna design that Australian collectors have come to treasure. By 1977, the design had been in circulation for 11 years, and the dies used to strike these coins were subject to varying degrees of wear over production runs. This means that strike quality can vary more than you might expect within the same year's issue. And finding an example with a full, sharp strike, particularly in the echidna's spines and facial detail, is a genuine challenge in gem grades. The errors that elevate 1977 5-cent coins into serious money are similar in category to other years, but carry extra weight because of the lower base population in high grades. A double die error on a 1977 is rarer simply because there are fewer high-grade 1977 5-cents in the market to begin with. If you encounter a 1977 5-cent where the lettering shows obvious mechanical doubling as opposed to machine doubling, understanding the difference is critical. You are looking at a genuine variety that attribution specialists will want to examine closely. Machine doubling, sometimes called strike doubling or shelf doubling, is a common occurrence and adds minimal premium. What adds serious premium is hub doubling, where the design itself was doubled during the die creation process. On the 1977 5-cent, any hub doubling visible in the Australia legend, the date numerals, or in the echidna's body creates a legitimate error variety that grading services will attribute on the coin's holder label. That attribution label is the difference between a coin selling for hundreds and one selling for thousands. The off-metal strikes and wrong planche errors, while extremely rare, have been documented in Australian decimal coinage from various years including the 1970s. An off-metal error occurs when a planche intended for one denomination accidentally enters the press for another denomination. If a 5-cent planche were struck on a 2-cent planche or vice versa, the resulting coin would be visibly wrong in size, weight, and sometimes color. These are the kinds of errors that specialists spend careers searching for, and their values operate well outside normal pricing guides. For the 1977 5-cent in standard grades, meaning circulated examples in VF to F condition, the values are modest and appropriate to their grade. The real story is in uncirculated territory. An MS-63 example is worth meaningful money to a serious collector. An MS-64 starts generating real competition at auction. An MS-65 is where the pricing jumps significantly, and anything graded MS-66 or above by a major service is a legitimately rare coin that the Australian numismatic market will chase hard. Proof versions of the 1977 5-cent were included in official mint proof sets, and these carry their own collector premium, particularly in original government packaging with full set accompaniment. A complete 1977 proof set in original case with documentation is a desirable collector piece, but the individual proof coin removed from the set and sold separately carries less premium than the intact set. Condition of the packaging matters almost as much as condition of the coins for proof set collectors. Australian collectors specifically need to pay attention to toning on 1977 5-cent coins. Original natural toning that has developed over decades in original mint-issued packaging is generally viewed positively by collectors and does not reduce grade or value. Artificial toning, created through chemical exposure or heat, is detectable under professional examination and will result in a coin being designated as improperly cleaned or artificially toned by grading services. That designation permanently and significantly reduces value. The $3,500 to $10,000 range for this coin is not a fantasy. It reflects actual auction results for properly graded, high-condition examples from this year, and those results have been trending upward as the supply of gem originals continues to contract, while collector demand for strong date completions in Australian decimal sets continues to grow. The next coin on our list came just 4 years later, and the error varieties on that one have put collectors into a frenzy for very good reason. Next up, 1981 Australian 5-cent coin. When experienced Australian coin dealers talk about the 1981 5-cent coin, the conversation almost always turns to errors quickly, and for very good reason. This is a date that sits in a sweet spot between relative obscurity to the general public and fierce recognition among serious numismatists, and the $6,000 to $20,000 range it commands reflects exactly that dynamic playing out in the auction market. The 1981 5-cent was produced at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, continuing the standard cupro-nickel composition and carrying the third portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse, a portrait change that is itself a point of interest for collectors who specialize in the portrait. Varieties across Australian decimal coinage. The transition between different obverse portraits on Australian coins is an area of significant collector interest, and understanding which portrait appears on your coin can affect its classification and value within specialist collections. The reverse continues with Stuart Devlin's echidna, now 15 years into its run as one of the most recognized coin designs in Australian history. By 1981, the echidna reverse was deeply familiar to every Australian who had handled change, but the quality of striking and high-grade examples remained variable and dependent on the specific die pairing and the point in a production run at which a given coin was struck. Early die state coins, struck before the dies began showing fatigue, command higher grades and therefore higher values. The errors documented on 1981 5-cent coins are genuinely exciting for the Australian market. The double obverse error, where misalignment during die hubbing has created visible doubling in the portrait and surrounding legend, is present on a documented number of 1981 examples. The key diagnostic areas to examine are the eyebrow and ear of the Queen's portrait, the lettering of Elizabeth II, and the date itself. On genuine hub doubling errors, you will see separation between the doubled elements that is clean and consistent. This is not the smeared or shelf-like appearance of machine doubling, but a distinct and separate impression. The broadstrike error is another variety associated with 1981 5-cents that collectors actively seek. A broadstrike occurs when the collar, the ring that surrounds the planchet during striking and gives the coin its correct diameter, is absent or fails to contain the planchet properly during the strike. The result is a coin that is wider than normal with a softened edge and a spread design. In high grades, a broadstruck 1981 5-cent is a compelling and visually dramatic piece that stands apart from all standard examples. Off-center strikes from 1981 are also documented. The degree of off-center determines value dramatically. A 5 to 10% off-center strike, while technically an error, shows only a slight misalignment and carries a modest premium. A 30% or greater off-center strike, where a significant portion of the design is missing and the blank planche edge is clearly visible on one side, is a major error. A 50% off-center strike with the date still visible on the coin is one of the most desirable error configurations in any year of Australian coinage, and if such an example exists from 1981 in high grade, the $20,000 ceiling of this coin's range would not necessarily be the end of the conversation. The proof versions of the 1981 5 cent appear in that year's official proof set, and collectors pursuing complete proof date runs will need this year for completion. Proof examples show the full depth of Stuart Devlin's echidna design in a way that circulation strikes simply cannot match. The frosted devices against mirror fields create a cameo contrast that makes the coin look almost three-dimensional under proper lighting. Deep cameo-designated proof coins from 1981 carry significant premiums over standard proof grades. For circulation strikes, the path to the upper end of the value range runs through professional grading. An MS65 red designation, if applied, though that designation is typically copper-specific, it serves as a reference point for grade quality thinking. Or simply an MS65 or MS66 designation from PCGs or NGC on a 1981 5 cent tells the market that this particular coin survived over 4 decades, without being spent, without being stored poorly, and without being cleaned or tampered with. That survival rate for gem examples of any common year Australian 5 cent is low enough to create genuine scarcity at high grades. The $6,000 to $20,000 range rewards the patient and the diligent. Coins from this year are still being found in old mint sets, original rolls from the period, and estate collections from collectors who put coins away in the early 1980s and never revisited them. The opportunity exists for anyone willing to look carefully and invest in proper professional assessment. Coming up next is a coin from just 2 years later that carries one of the most talked about error varieties in Australian 5 cent history, and once you see the numbers, you will understand why. Next up, 1983 Australian 5 cent coin. The 1983 Australian 5 cent coin carries a price range of $5,500 to $15,000, and the collectors who actively pursue this date will tell you that finding a quality example is consistently harder than the year numbers might suggest. There is something about the early 1980s in Australian coinage that creates a perfect combination of relatively limited surviving high-grade populations and growing collector demand. And the 1983 5 cent sits squarely in that zone. By 1983, Australia's decimal coinage program had been running for 17 years, and the Royal Australian Mint's production was well established. However, well-established production does not mean uniform quality across every coin struck, and for collectors, that variability is where the treasure is found. Strike quality, planchet preparation, and die condition all contribute to the final quality of each individual coin. And the examples that emerged from this year with everything going right, clean planchy, fresh die, precise alignment, full strike, are the ones now grading at MS65 and above and commanding the prices that make collectors take notice. The obverse portrait on the 1983 5 cent continues the Arnold Machen effigy tradition, and the reverse maintains the Devlin echidna. But close examination of 1983 examples reveals something that specialist collectors have specifically noted. There are documented cases of die polish lines, fine parallel scratches in the field resulting from the mint's process of cleaning and polishing the dies, that are more pronounced on certain 1983 examples than on coins from surrounding years. These die polish lines are not cleaning marks on the coin itself, they are part of the die and appear on every coin struck from that particular die state. Understanding this distinction is critical when having a coin assessed, because cleaning marks reduce grade while die polish lines are a characteristic of the coin's production history. The error varieties on 1983 5 cents have generated consistent conversation in the Australian numismatic community. Repunched date errors, where the date digits show evidence of having been punched into the die more than once, resulting in visible secondary impressions of the numerals, have been documented on this year. The 3 in 1983 is the numeral to examine most carefully on any example you are assessing. Under magnification, a genuine repunched date error shows a secondary impression of the numeral that is clearly separate from the primary. not merely a spread or weakness in the primary impression. This variety, properly attributed, adds meaningful value to any example in which it appears. Die crack errors also appear on 1983 5 cents. As dies wear through production runs, small fractures can develop, and these fractures appear as raised lines on the struck coin, the opposite of what you might intuitively expect, because the crack in the die creates extra space that metal flows into during striking. Minor die cracks add modest collector interest. Major die cracks that cross prominent design elements or create dramatic visual effect on the coin are legitimately significant errors that die variety specialists actively pursue and pay premiums for. The lamination error is another category worth understanding for 1983 5 cents. Lamination errors occur when the planche metal has an internal flaw, a void, an inclusion, or a layer separation in the cupronickel that causes a piece of the coin's surface to flake or peel. Pre-strike laminations, where the planche had the flaw before entering the press, show the error across the struck design. Post-strike laminations, which are less desirable from an error collector's perspective, show peeling that occurred after striking. On a 1983 5 cent, a dramatic pre-strike lamination error in high grade is a distinctive and marketable piece. The proof version of the 1983 5 cent included in that year's official set is a clean, well-struck example that shows the echidna design at its best. The proof set market for 1983 is healthy among collectors pursuing complete Australian proof set runs, and the individual proof 5 cent from this year in original packaging has solid baseline value. The greater premium, however, belongs to exceptional circulation strikes with attributable mint errors or to individual proof coins designated deep cameo by professional grading services. When assessing whether a 1983 5 cent you have encountered is genuinely approaching the upper end of the value range, the honest answer is that professional grading from PCGs or NGC is the only definitive path to knowing. The difference between an MS64 and an MS65 on a coin with this kind of value range is not academic. It is potentially thousands of dollars. Dealers' opinions matter, but a certified grade in a tamper-evident holder is what major auction houses and serious collectors require before committing to top-of-range prices. The Australian collector community has been increasingly sophisticated in recent years about the 5 cent series, driven partly by the realization that these coins, small, inexpensive to use as pocket change, were saved in meaningful quantities only by a relatively small number of foresighted individuals, making gem originals genuinely rare decades later. The next coin in our series is from just 1 year later, and it brings its own set of compelling error varieties and a value range that deserves your full attention. Next up, 1984 Australian 5 cent coin. The 1984 Australian 5 cent coin commands a market range of $5,700 to $12,000, and for collectors who understand the Australian decimal coinage landscape in depth, this is a date that rewards careful attention and patient searching. The 1984 5 cent occupies a position in the series where genuine gem examples are scarcer than casual observers expect, errors are documented and attributable, and the collector base pursuing high-grade examples continues to grow year on year. The production context of the 1984 5 cent is worth understanding. By the mid-1980s, the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra was producing coins for both domestic circulation and for collector sets, and the distinction between coins intended for pocket change and those struck with collector quality in mind was more meaningful than many people realize. Coins that ended up in circulation experienced handling, transportation, and storage conditions that were devastating to their surfaces, while coins set aside immediately in original mint packaging retained their luster and originality. The gem examples from 1984 that command the top of the value range today are almost certainly coins that never saw significant circulation, either saved from original mint sets or pulled from rolls by foresighted collectors in the 1980s. The obverse portrait on the 1984 5 cent is a detail that specialist collectors examine carefully. The portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used on Australian coinage had its own evolution over the decades of the decimal series, and authentication of the specific portrait type on any given coin is part of the complete attribution process. For the 1984 5 cent specifically, ensuring that the correct portrait is present and that there are no obvious anomalies in the portrait's rendering which could indicate a die state issue or an error variety, is part of a thorough assessment. The reverse echidna design by Stuart Devlin, now 18 years into its run on Australian 5-cent coins by 1984, was being struck from dies that were produced with the accumulated expertise of nearly 2 decades of decimal coinage production. That expertise generally resulted in well-struck reverses with good detail, but the individual quality of each striking still depended on the specific die, the planche condition, the press settings, and the timing within the production run. Coins struck from fresh, well-prepared dies at the beginning of a production run consistently show sharper detail than those struck later from worn dies, and that difference translates directly to grade and therefore to value. The error varieties associated with the 1984 5-cent include the off-center strike, which appears across multiple years of Australian decimal coinage but takes on particular significance in years with limited high-grade populations. An off-center 1984 5-cent in the 20 to 30% range, showing most of the design but with a clear crescent of unstruck planched visible, is a compelling error coin. Larger off-center strikes that still retain the date, which collectors universally require for attribution and marketability, are significantly more valuable and considerably harder to find. The wrong planche error, while extraordinarily rare, must be mentioned for the 1984 5-cent because any documented example from this year would represent one of the most significant Australian decimal coin errors in private hands. Wrong planche errors occur when a blank intended for one coin denomination is accidentally fed into the press for a different denomination. The resulting coin has the design of one denomination struck onto the planche of another, creating a dramatic discrepancy in size, weight, and sometimes color that is immediately apparent to any experienced examiner. These errors are not theoretical. They exist in documented collections from various years of Australian decimal production, and their values are genuinely extraordinary. Die cap errors are another category worth understanding for 1984 5-cents. A die cap occurs when a coin sticks to one of the dies and is carried through subsequent strikes, first being struck multiple times until it wraps around the die face and then impressioning its design onto subsequent planches that it contacts. The resulting die cap itself, a coin with a dramatically domed shape and a brockage impression, is one of the most visually striking errors in numismatics. A 1984 die cap 5-cent would be a landmark piece for an Australian error collection. For practical purposes, collectors assessing 1984 5-cent coins should focus on originality of surfaces, quality of strike, and presence of any anomalies that warrant closer examination. Original luster, the cartwheel-like sheen that circulates across the coin's fields as it is tilted under light, is the most important indicator of an original, uncirculated surface. This luster is permanent once the coin is struck and is destroyed by the smallest amount of circulation, cleaning, or improper handling. Its presence in full, unbroken form is the hallmark of the gem examples that achieve the upper range of this coin's market value. The professional grading pathway for 1984 5-cents is the same as for all serious Australian decimal rarities. PCGs and NGC are the internationally recognized services whose designations are accepted by major auction houses, major dealers, and serious collectors worldwide. The cost of grading submission is a straightforward investment when the potential value difference between a raw coin and a slab gem is measured in thousands of dollars. The 1984 5-cent is a coin that belongs in every serious collection of Australian decimal issues, and the market has been consistent in rewarding those who find and properly authenticate the best examples. The story of Australian 5-cent coinage does not end here. The dates ahead carry their own surprises, their own documented errors, and their own capacity to generate the kind of values that remind every collector why they started looking closely at small coins in the first place.